Come in, Ocean Sailor. Come in, Ocean Sailor.
The Ocean Sailor Podcast. Brought to you by Ocean Sailor Magazine and Kraken Yachts.
Hello and welcome to Ocean Sailor Podcast. And this is number 3, as it happens, with the two Dicks, me, Dick Durham, and he, Dick Beaumont. And today we're going to discuss gun law, or guns on the high seas. Should you have a gun on board or should you not?
Yeah, thanks, Dick. Hi, everyone. Got some great stuff for you on the podcast today. I'm sure you'll be very interested in it. I certainly couldn't tear my own ears away from it.
Wherever you go in the world, gun laws are going to be different. They're very strict in some areas and a bit more lax in others. And as a rule, you don't know who's carrying a gun, who isn't. You mostly assume that people are not carrying guns. Super yachts and, of course, freighters do carry marine security because, of course, they are targeted vessels. They're hugely valuable, and when they're in piracy areas, then, of course, they do need extra special protection. But that isn't the sort of thing that affects us and isn't the sort of thing we're going to be talking about. It's really the debate about, you know, should you arm yourself to protect yourself? And when it comes to having a gun, the attitude towards it and even the philosophy behind it, and never mind the legalities, are different wherever you go in the world. And it's all very well for me to sit here yapping on about it when I've done mostly coastal sailing in UK and home waters. But Dick Beaumont has been far afield and has certainly had experiences that are quite hair-raising. And he has asked himself the question, should I not have had a gun? So we'll listen to what he has to say. And of course, Rene Tiemessen faced a gun. He had a semi-automatic weapon pointed at him. So, of course, his views are very pertinent to this podcast.
Yeah, well, Dick, I think you're right there. You know, everybody around the world, each nation has got a different attitude towards guns or firearms in general. You know, you go from American attitude, which, of course, they got the Second Amendment, to a situation in Europe where most people would run a mile from even having a gun in their home, let alone picking it up and using it.
Yes, of course, it's perfectly understandable. But however, sailing through international waters is very different from sailing into a nation state's territory.
There's, of course, the moral issue or the ethical issue, should you carry a gun or there isn't. But there's also some practical considerations that I think a lot of people may not be completely aware of. And they are an issue, or they are issues that are difficult to overcome. In the first place, customs, in my own experience, fallen into two categories, which is those that will come on board the boat, allow you to seal a weapon or weapons into a purpose-built gun locker, and they'll put a seal on it. That seal then goes on to your paperwork and your exit paperwork, your transit paperwork while you're in that country. And then when you come to exit the country, the customs there, immigration or customs, sometimes one and the same, will come on board, will check the seal number and check that the seal's intact and all is good. Woe betide you if that seal isn't intact, because it's a tacit demonstration of the fact that you actually used this gun in their territory, and you're going to be in a world of trouble. And of course, you've then got to say, well, okay, so I've got this gun to defend myself, but I can't use it because it's locked in a cabinet. And the only time then you are likely to be using it is when you're not in that country. And I do think that the majority of problems are going to be somewhere close to the coast, not far off ashore. But the next situation is even more difficult, which is that they will, and most I think this applies to, they will confiscate the weapon, give you, a proper detailed acceptance of that weapon. They will then hold that weapon and release that weapon back to you when you leave their country. The problem for ocean-going or world cruising yachtsmen is, of course, that they're very unlikely to be wanting to leave from the same place the port that they entered is very unlikely to be the port that they're going to exit from. And now you've got a situation, for example, in the Philippines or in Indonesia or Papua New Guinea, where there's 5,000 islands and you're 2,000 miles apart, and somehow you're going to expect the customs or you yourself to organise getting that to your point of exit in the time that it suits you to take it. And I can tell you, it just ain't going to happen. I had a spear gun confiscated in Indonesia in one point. They decided they thought it was a dangerous weapon, and it was for spearfishing, of course. They confiscated it. And I was able to collect that back from that particular area authority, which was the same place that took it. And it took me 4 days to get it back from the same place. And everybody was on holiday. Everybody didn't know what I was talking about. It was all just an absolute nightmare. So trying to get it back from the other side of the country and in a different island with good luck. I don't think it's going to happen.
So you had to live on steaks instead of fish then, Dick?
Yeah, he was, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we still did fish. So that was okay. But then this brings forward then the next two dilemmas, really, because the alternative to that is to say, okay, well, look, I won't take a gun into some given country, but, I fancy that I need a gun when I'm in there. You could run that argument in Papua New Guinea, I would say. And then what you would need to do is buy a gun once you're in that country. And who you're buying the gun from is effectively an illegal arms dealer. And, you're doing a dance with the devil. And the other alternative, which is I think even worse, is that you smuggle the gun in. Because if you smuggle the gun in and they take sniffer dogs on board, like do in Australia and other places, they'll find the gun and you're going to be banged up and your yacht is going to be impounded and confiscated and you're in another world of nightmares. So there are practical considerations that I'd like to flag up beyond the wish lists and the ethics and the morals that we might have. That's what I've experienced.
So there's a philosophy and there's practicalities, obviously, with all
this.
This.
You can dream whatever you want to dream, can't you? Whether you can actually pull it off. And it's like we find in many situations, traveling around the world. And I think this is another thing which, we tend to think that we should be able to apply our laws. This is very common, an attitude that we should be able to apply our laws, the laws of the country of our residents, to the country that we're entering into. And it's so far from the truth because it's just, thanks very much, mate. But this is actually our country, not yours. So, you don't have any rights, none. As a transiting yachtsman, you are itinerant. You've got to think about that. They allow you in under their pleasure. And when they don't want you to be there anymore, away you go. And so I think this is particularly applicable when we're talking about guns and arms and all the rest of it.
Even though, of course, a vessel to some extent is a sovereign territory, is it not? But
no, I don't think it is, Dick.
Okay.
I think I can tell you this. You absolutely have to be there on the basis that you are their guest at their behest. And you're going to play by their rules, and you don't want to play by their rules. You're just going to be sailing out to sea at very short notice, or worse. We could get into the subject of Australian customs and immigrations another time, but try messing them around and see how far you get.
Fair.
Much different from most other places.
Yeah, interesting. And of course, as well as your experiences, Dick, in Papua New Guinea, we are going to be talking to Rene Tiemessen today. We featured him in Ocean Sailor magazine, you may recall, in the February issue. And of course, his stories are already also on the website. He's got some alarming stories to tell, but it's even better to hear them in the first person, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Rene is a very good friend of mine. He's been a good friend for quite a few years. We met in Phuket. And we both were so enamored with the whole Thailand sailing region that we based our boats there for a considerable amount of time. and became very good friends in those times. As Rene, his wife Edith, and they have a young daughter called Devi. She was a babe at that particular time, and Rene went north and up and ran through Pirate Alley, which he's got some hair-raising experiences to recount. I went south. I went down through Indonesia, then right up and over and through Papua New Guinea, through the Louisiades and into Australia, and then on down the coast of Australia. And it was in Papua New Guinea, really, that I had an awful lot of experiences that kind of left me in a bit of a quandary. But we'll come to that. Be good to hear from Rene first. So maybe we'll give Rene a call up.
That sounds like a great idea. I'm looking forward to hearing from Rene again. Always an interesting man to listen to.
Yeah, one thing for sure with Rene, you're never left wondering what his point of view is. he's very forthright, being Dutch, but I mean he's Dutch on steroids, really.
Thank you for lending us your ears. We will hope you lend us your ears on a regular basis for these podcasts. And if you do enjoy listening to them, we certainly enjoy you listening to us. Please support us. We are available on most podcasting services, and we are also available on the Ocean Sailor and Kraken Yachts YouTube channels. Please have a look, have a listen, join us, subscribe, tell us what you think. Even if it's excoriating, we don't mind. We can take it. We're sailors. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to call up my good friend Rene Tiemessen, and we'll see what he has to say on the subject of arms on board. I know he's had some very, very significant experiences. It'd be good to hear what he's got to say. So I don't know if you're there, Rene.
Yes, of course, Dick. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world listening to this podcast. Yes, I'm there.
And of course, we've been good friends for, I guess, 12, 15 years. How old is Devi now?
Devi, our daughter, was born in Phuket in 2011. So, no, 2009, sorry. So, we've been friends almost as long as that. I think a little bit longer.
Yeah, she was just a few months old when I met you.
Yes.
I remember. I wonder if you remember this, Rene. We met over a mutual dislike of a guy called Stefan. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Well, Stefan, of course, was a refrigeration engineer who had a degree in arrogance that none of us had really met much before.
I suppose it's just as well for Stefan that neither of you were armed.
Which is really the subject that we're here to talk about, eh? Well, Dick and I are discussing the subject of guns on board and whether you should, in fact, have a gun or you shouldn't. I know you've got very strong views on it. But in particular, you've had some experiences. So I wonder if it would be a good place to start with just telling us, I think there were kind of 3 significant incidences that occurred in the Red Sea or just outside the Red Sea. So, tell us about those, Rene.
Yes, Dick. Yeah. Well, I have to take you back into the history a little bit. We left the Med in 2007 to go. Our destination was India to begin with, and later that became Thailand. And when we, of course, we entered from here through the Suez Channel into the Red Sea. Now, as maybe anyone knows who's ever been there, it's quite a rugged piece of terrain, and you have 1,000 miles from Port Suez down to the entrance of the Red Sea, which is called Bab el-Mandeb, where the piracy area starts. Now, in that time, it was quite well known how the situation was. And it was dangerous. It was believed to be better to sail in some form of convoy, although that was pretty loose. The route was well known. And when we came to we were together with some 20 other boats. uh, which was kind of loose, meaning that we were sailing day trips, so you were sailing them on your own or a couple of day trips, and then you would gather again in some sort of Marsa, which is the name of the base there, or at some
So
point.
Rene, this is just kind of a mutual bunch of boats that will all happen to be going at the same time. There's nothing very specifically organized. Is that right?
It was called a rally, but it was very unorganized. And what we organized, we did amongst each other. And we had this a radio, a morning radio, where that was in this case was us who did the morning radio. We had this sort of a thing about what the weather was like, and a fun thing. And then one morning, just very close, because at Baba Mandeb, it was a very particular route we had to take to avoid getting to the west coast of Yemen too soon, because there were rebels active and there were people shooting at each other already. And so we had to pass as far, if you go south to the east, to the west side of the Red Sea, and then just at Bab el Mandeb, head on over to the other side. And that is where it went wrong. That's also the point where you come closest to Somalia. Now, you have to understand that when you are sailing there, you have visuals to land on either side pretty much all the way. But the problem is that the wind is often fierce, so you have to really wait your moment. And one morning we left very early, around 6 o'clock in the morning, because the wind had gone down, and we were sort of sailing through Bab el Mandeb when suddenly a skiff appeared. And the thing is, these boats are super fast, and from the moment you see them till the moment that they arrive to your boat is only 1 minute. So the chances missing them even before they get to your boat is pretty big, because you're not looking over your shoulder all the time. So one morning, suddenly this skiff was there, and it appeared out of nowhere, and it was came very close to the boat, up to about 10 feet. And there were about 5, 6 guys inside, all armed with Kalashnikovs, and screaming and yelling at us, and they clearly wanted us to stop and whatever. And I sent my crew down below immediately, so I was alone on deck. I was on the full sail and on a 60-foot boat.
So Rene, just interrupt you there. Who was with you on board?
I was there with Edith, my wife, and one South African girl, crew. She was on a maiden voyage with us. No, I was not completely true. She was with us for a couple of months, but she had never been anywhere really out to sea. So this was a pretty scary thing. So I sent her down below, because I didn't want to be confronted with another issue with these girls. And these guys came very close, and they started pointing these Kalashnikovs at me. And the strange thing was, I wasn't really scared, what I would have believed to be in the first place. When somebody points a gun, that since you've never had that you think you're getting very scared. But I was only angry, so I became super angry and started shouting out the top of my lungs to them that they had to leave, and that in a more popular way, to basically F off and don't point the gun at me, and get that gun out of my face, and at the top of my lungs. And in the meantime, and this was a thing, I had the radio, my VHF radio outside. So I started calling Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We're under possible attack. Can anyone please come to help? We are in that position. All very short messages. And then instantly this clutter of radio messages started to appear that were on a speaker outside that they could obviously also hear. And while I was shouting at them, the first one sort of shrugged and said, and while he was still pointing the Kalashnikov at me, turned around to his mates who were looking at him like, yeah, we don't know what's happening. He's obviously not giving up. He's not giving in. And the sole fact.
I got to interrupt you there, Rene. Yeah, of course, I've seen the wrath of the Rene on one or more occasions over time with, as you said before, people that you're not entirely happy with. And I sympathise with them. There was only 5 of them, and they only had guns. So Rene Tiemessen screaming at them at the top of his voice. That must have caught them totally off balance.
Yeah, it did. But what I realized there, but it was also during my voyage through the Red Sea already in Sudan and in Eritrea and in the south of Egypt, is that the cultural difference between them and us is so massive that if I would have had a gun at that moment, the whole vibe of that incident would have had a complete different outcome. Because since they knew I was physically not a threat, or this threat was imminent, that they had the gun and I didn't trigger them to shoot at me. And you know, people of the Arabian Peninsula, especially when they're at sea, they almost all chew cut, which is quite a heavy a leaf.
What's it called again?
Cut, which is a leaf that they chew, sort of a tea leaf, but it makes you enormously numb and high. And it's not like I normally don't see it when people are under the influence. When people are under the influence of cut, you will definitely see it. They've swollen eyes and they're really a little bit off the world.
Wow.
And all these guys suffer from that. So, you know, and together with the fact that their cultural background is so completely different, completely used to wearing guns, completely used to being alive and dead. If you go into the desert of Sudan, you find tribes that have virtually nothing, and they bury the first 4 kids that they have because 4 out of 5 die. So the whole thing about life and death is a completely different approach. And that makes that with a gun there, you stand no chance. Because even if you have a shotgun or a handgun, what happens if 5 of them start shooting with their Kalashnikovs? Yeah, I mean, you're as good as dead for sure. Yeah, but besides the fact that they are used to using that thing, and I'm not a professional shooter, and I don't train myself every day. So it's completely useless in that incident. But what happened in the course of the day, I kept on screaming. They shrugged. They didn't know what to do. And there was more and more clutter on the radio. And people told that they were turning around, although they were not within visual sight. They were further away than that. And all together in that moment, and their distraction and my determination to get rid of them led to the fact that remember, we were on the full sail. We're doing upwind about nine and a half knots.
And Rene, you still continued under sail.
Yeah, I was under autopilot and sail was full on. And
so these are all of this shouting and going. You're sailing on, trying to set the scene. I mean, it's a horrific circumstance. So you're under sail on Alondra, of course, the beautiful boat that you had, and they're keeping pace with you, basically telling you to stop. You're just kind of explaining to them you don't want to.
Yeah, the sea was not very rough, but you had, let's say, half a meter, 40 centimeters waves. It was blowing maybe 15 to 18 knots or something. And in that skiff, these skiffs are about, what are they? 25 foot, open skiffs with a 70 horsepower Yamaha behind it, mostly these old enduro Yamahas. And in the wake of the boat, but in the waves, they have a pretty rough time. I mean, on Alondra, a 60-foot, 30-ton boat, upwind on these waves is nothing. But for them, it was a pretty rough ride to begin with. And I was doing 9 knots upwind, so it was not an easy easy game for them.
How long did they stick around, and what did they do in the end? What happened? Did they just go, or what?
The whole incident took maybe not longer than 15 minutes. Over shouting. It was a long time. Remember that. I mean, it was longer than I wanted to. But at some point, they shrugged. They didn't know what to do. They held back a little bit, and they started, of course, conversing amongst each other. What's next? But at that time, they were already some 30 foot away, and now they're backing off a little bit further. And then I kept on shouting, and I kept on telling that help was on the way, and lying that the Navy was close by, and I don't know what I said. And then in the end, they gave up, and they went.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I bet there was a fair bit of silence on board after they'd gone. Because when you're in the middle of these kind of incidences, the adrenaline's running, you're fired up, and then it's over. And there's, well, in my estimation and what's happened to me, there's just kind of silence, and then the true reality of what happened perhaps dawns on you after, would you say?
Yeah, we had been in the Red Sea already for a little over than 2.5 months. We had been up the Strait of Aqaba to Jordan, so we've seen a lot there. And you enter into a complete new reality. So your kind of acceptance to that reality also changes, and your life even comes into a new reality. But yes, of course, the girls were, and Edith is her, she's a strong woman, and Nadia, our South African crew, super strong girl. But yeah,
I did actually meet her, Rene. I did meet Nadia. She was with you for a fair bit of time down in Thailand, wasn't she?
But it's a traumatic thing, and at that moment, you're not so much. You don't realize that so much. Actually, for me, it came out years later. But that was also after the second incident where. The second incident, which I will talk about a little bit later. But at that moment, you know how that works. You've crossed oceans more often than I did. There is no going back. There is no giving up. There is no handing in the reins and say, here you go. No, you just continue. And so that's also the autopilot that you drive on.
Just to come in there, if I may, sorry to interrupt that account, because it's absolutely fascinating and very valuable to hear it firsthand like that. I mean, what comes up in my mind, first of all, is what did your wife and crew say when it was all over? I mean, what did they think was going to happen when they heard you shouting at these guys? They realized they were up.
The funny thing was that Edith went, as I said, below. They did go below. So I was alone on deck, and deliberately, because I didn't want them also to be yes or no attracted to the women that were there. So I thought it's better to have them down below. And Edith started hiding the computers and the money and the passports, which is a typical female thing to do. You start organizing. And as I said, Edith is a strong woman. So we were kind of, when we all came out of this, we were kind of laughing. She was laughing about me shouting, and I was laughing about her trying to hide the money and the passports and the computers, which in the end, of course, I don't know, if they really come on board, then you have to probably give it up.
So Rene, that was laughter then as a relief.
I guess. Of course, of course, you're all nervous, and you feel, you also don't realize quite in what kind of danger you've just been in. I don't know, something, unhuman almost, that you start thinking the worst immediately. So you sort of laugh it off, and later you have a barbecue all together, and You laugh even harder because people said, yeah, we could hear you shout almost a mile away. We heard you shout through the radio. It's also very relieving sometimes to let off some steam, of course, and you have to use it in the right way. But certainly it came in very handy there. And I would absolutely advise anyone, start screaming, yelling, do whatever you can do to make clear that you don't want happening what's happening to you at that moment. And
that's very interesting, because you see a lot of people, and I probably would include myself in this. I mean, my natural reaction would be, if I had my wife and well, anyone on board, I think it's a very brave thing to do that you did, and responsible. You sent them below cleverly. You didn't want, ladies being an issue with the guys as well. I totally get that. But you're on your own, you're shouting. I think my response would have been to try to talk to them, to try to negotiate, and to try to reason. And that probably, well, clearly, it wouldn't have worked, would it?
Let me just tell you, I've been in a kind of a similar situation when, and I can't completely get where you're coming from here, Rene, because you're not necessarily really thinking about what you're doing. You're just reacting. When I sailed first from Indonesia into Papua, first is Papua New Guinea, and then first is Papua, then there's Papua New Guinea. And as we were crossing into Papua New Guinea, we went in to find a little dive location. What we normally did is about 4 o'clock at the end of whatever passage we were making, we'd dip in, find an anchorage somewhere, then come out, do a dive and go back to the anchorage. That was our kind of general day plan. This particular place was a place called New Amsterdam. And we went in there, and it sounded bizarre. It sounds now bizarre afterwards, but we sailed around the back of this small island, which looked like it was going to be a good anchorage. And there was a village there, and there was a big archway, and hanging up in the archway, hanging up or down as ornaments, there were all kinds of bones. And I remember, we could see this clearly. And I remember saying to the guys, God, look at this. They must be headhunters here, or, cannibals or something. All jolly good fun stuff. And we then found an anchorage and we went back out to dive. What we didn't know is that they mobilized and they sent out a panga, I think with the chief and 7 other guys. As we were now looked to them like we were going, they came in this panga, which had 2 outriders, and this guy stood up in the middle, a guy, I think he was the chief, and shouted, you come. And it wasn't a polite invitation. That was quite clear, it wasn't. And straight away I realised, hang on, we got a bit of a problem here. And I shouted, no, we going. And he said, no, you come. And now all 7 or 8 guys have stood up in this panga, and they're waving their fists and arms and telling us we've got to go with them. And I just carried on going. I throttled her up and started to motor out to sea as fast as I could at 8 knots. Well, they then tried to come underneath the dinghy and board us from the stern. And of course, that wasn't such an easy thing to do because they've got this panga with outriders. But by now, I'm now shouting and screaming at him. And I had 5 plus myself, quite big lads as crew. I got everybody out and I said, right, look, guys, this is big deal. We got to big this. We got to really big this up. And it didn't ever occur to me that what we should do is give in. And afterwards, I thought, well, it might have been the thing to do, but I didn't. Anyway, they tried to board us. And as they coming back underneath the transom to try and get onto the reverse shear transom, what I did is I slowed down as I saw what they were trying to do. I sort of slowed down as if I was going to let them board us. And then as soon as they got close, they put a guy out on the panga on the outrigger, and I put the hammer down fast, and there was all of a sudden a gap, and one of my guys was standing there with something very intimidating like a boat hook to try and push him off. And anyway, they couldn't make it across. So what they then did is they came around in front of us, and they pulled back a canvas on the foredeck, and underneath that is a grappling. So this guy in the bow, he's standing with a grappling hook. It's quite obvious what he's going to try and do. He's going to throw it onto the boat and board us. Anyway, I'm slowing down and veering off, and that doesn't work for them. So what they did, and the mistake they made, fortunately for me, is they tried to cut us off. And they went across the bow of the boat, trying to cut off where we're going onto outer sea. And what I did is I put the hammer right down hard, and I swung the vessel at the last minute, and I just clipped the corner of one of the outriggers, and it threw the guy with the grappling into the sea. And we then, obviously they got to try and recover him on board. And as luck would have it, there was a fair bit of wind, and we were getting further and further and further offshore. So we got away. Effectively, we did get away. So I understand that, and I didn't, of course, have a gun. We got spear guns out and flares and machetes and all the rest of it. But and then again, you talk about it afterwards, and you analyse, well, what might you have done? And of course, it's not quite so easy to analyse it at the time that it's happening. So, Rene, that was one of the experiences I had. But I think you had a couple more. It'd be good to hear about those too.
Yeah, sailing through these areas, and as you have seen in Papua New Guinea, the story that you just told us, is I can fully support that thing. It has happened, of course, when you're traveling around the world like you have, and we've been living on a boat for years, sailing around. You get into incidents, whether it is people from the harbor, or that is remote islands, or maybe you dock on the wrong little jetty, or you confront the wrong fisherman, whatever it is. But what you learn, and especially when you are in these far out areas, that the situation between people is completely different. I always describe this to people as where if two of us would stand opposite of each other with a gun, as you and an English and me as a Dutch guy, and we point guns at each other, we still have some sort of understanding. We still have a sort of similar background. I know where you come from. I know where you're going. At least that is my mindset. And we start shouting at each other, and I'll call you a son of a, and you call me the same, and you tell me my mother was a. This goes on, and the tension builds. But somehow, and while we are pointing the gun, somehow we still have this mutual understanding. And we sort of know when we go over the edge, and probably one of us pulls the trigger. And that understanding is completely gone in the areas that you are just describing. Your background is so completely different from theirs that you can't expect them to build up the tension the same way. Their span of tension is completely different. And that makes that you are absolutely you're 3-0 behind in everything you do. Plus the fact that they always carry the gun, and like in Somali or in Sudan, there is this tribe. They live in Eritrea and Sudan. It's a particular tribe, tall man, 2 meter long, dark, long hair up until almost their waist, and they carry medieval swords, not some small dagger. No. 1.5 meter, 5-foot swords on their back, medieval swords. They're not using them for peeling tomatoes or potatoes. Yeah? And that's what they carry around all day, every day. They look like cat weasel, all of them. I mean, so if you stand opposite of one of these guys, they're very friendly. But if you get into a problem with them, They pull out the sword. That's what they do. They kill each other over a lamb.
Do you know, Rene, you're so right with that, because that is exactly the same mindset that you're talking about that exists in Papua New Guinea. There are 860 different languages, not dialects, and there are so many different languages because every village is at war with the next village.
Exactly.
Everyone.
We can't understand that. We don't understand that. We obviously have no idea how that works. But if you live in an area like that already for thousands of years, yeah, it's not going to change because a Dick Beaumont or Rene Tiemessen comes there and tells them maybe it's not the way to do it. It's not going to work. It's not going to work.
No, but well put. So your clear position is don't have a gun.
My clear position is that don't think that will happen what you think will happen. Don't think this is a movie. Don't think this is a script where you get to say certain things and get to do certain things. If you would have asked me about the incident before it happened, and I think I did because we've discussed things like that before we left, obviously, like what would happen in case somebody would come with a gun. And I always said, look, if as soon as the gun is involved, I surrender, I give up, I let them in, and then I start negotiating. This is what I thought would happen. Yeah, and it turned out to be completely different. I also thought I would be absolutely terrified. I wasn't terrified, not a second, not a split second, not at all. I wasn't intimidated by this gun. I was angry that he pointed it at me. So, to all the people that think they can write the script for a future event, which involves any form of aggravation or weapons, forget it. It's going to be completely different. And you don't know how you're going to react. Like Dick just said, I don't know. I think I would have said, okay, let's come on board and let's negotiate. You simply don't know. And you know now, because you've been in a situation like that in Papua, and I've been into several of these incidents, and I know how I react.
Thank you very much indeed for lending us your ears. If you enjoy what you're hearing, then please subscribe to us, or even better, leave us a review. Tell us where we're going wrong or where we're going right. Always good to hear from you. Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating podcast listening to Rene. In fact, so interesting, we've had to break it in two. So we're going to leave Rene there. Of course, this had an impact on Rene, his brush against the pirates. And he will tell us about that in the next podcast, which we are due to broadcast on April the 5th, I think.
Yeah, some amazing stuff, as you said, Dick. It were so many stories. There's too much to cram into just one podcast. So we're going to do a part 2. I can't wait to listen to that because unbelievably, Rene went back up from Phuket, back up through Pirate Alley into the Med. And pretty serious stuff, and he paid the price a bit on that, and he's been bold enough to tell us all about it. So part 2 coming out on the 5th of April will be pretty interesting stuff. So yeah, that'll have you on the edge of your seats. I'm absolutely certain about that. Some hair-raising stuff. And what have we got coming up in Ocean Sailor this month then, Dick? I think there's a lot to go at, isn't there?
Well, plenty of good stuff, of course, but I'm no fool. But remember, it comes out on April the 1st. So there's a clue about one of the issues that may or may not be in there. We don't know. But I think following on from this, I think, very interesting podcast on guns, whether you gun law, have it on board or not. You've done a follow-up article for us on that, which I haven't had a chance to look at yet, but I think you're halfway through that, aren't you?
Yeah, I've almost got it finished, and it covers a few more issues that from different viewpoints as well. But it's the first of a 3-part onboard security series we're going to do. So I'm going to do. So that's going to be the issue that we've just talked about, guns. And then also we're going on to security risks region-wise. And then finally, it's going to be some tips and advice on what you can do to reduce risk to yourself in these circumstances. And so I think, we hopefully people are going to find that quite interesting.
Well, I'm sure they will. I have to say, you've been a serious ocean sailor. I'm more of a coastal man, so it hasn't really cropped up so much for me. But looking on the internet and having done stories with many sailors over the years in Yachting Monthly, one of the big problems was for a long time a kind of opportunistic crime in the Caribbean, people getting outboards stolen and stuff like that. So I know it is a big issue. It's talked about a lot. And I think it'll be very useful. Then also we've got Totem, the couple that went offshore, sold up everything. Actually, they did keep a house ashore in the end, but they sold up most of their things, went off with their children and taught them at sea, made a circumnavigation. They've put up together some very useful websites on which with a lot of tips on how to teach your children at sea, how to take them away and give them this, well, let's face it, fantastic experience, possibly better than any schoolroom will ever give you. They also wrote the book, quite literally. There is a book that we will feature in Mariner's Library from them on how to do exactly that.
I'm incredibly interested in that. In my early days of sailing, a Swedish couple that I met had a young boy on board. They were teaching him, Mai and Tenny, their name was, if they're still around and still listening. And they taught this young lad on board and stayed away for a fixed amount of time. I think in their case it was 2 years. And funnily enough, I recently met a couple of Swedes in a place called Agro de Harissimo. And
I need to go to school to better spell it, wouldn't you?
Yes, exactly. But incredible place that's in the Azores, by the way. And they had two young boys, 1 10, 1 11. The youngest one, Anders, completely blew me away. I mean, of course, most Swedes speak incredibly good English anyway. But at 10 and 11 years old, these guys, you didn't know, you couldn't even detect they had an accent. And they were so mature. And this young lad, this Anders, asking me all questions about how the sail balances and how this works and the Solent rig this and how the long keel does it. I was just completely swept away. The other thing that I'm intrigued to be talking to Totem about and hearing their story, we're going to have them on for a podcast as well.
Yes.
Is I understand they sailed through Papua New Guinea, going similar route, I think, to myself. With their children as well.
They did indeed, and they told me that when they were in Australia, they were asked where they were going, and when they said they were going to Papua New Guinea, they were told, well, you'll get your head chopped off and it'll be put on a pole. And he said, when we arrived, all we met was friendly people who told us how to build boats.
Yeah, I think, when you consider, I don't know, I haven't said this, but I was in Papua New Guinea for 3.5 months. And the incidences that I've described today probably amounted to 3 or 4 hours out of 3.5 months. So clearly, I mean, they're the things that stick in your mind, of course. But I was extremely lucky. I met a guy on the way in, a guy called Andrew Streeter. And anyway, he said, he said, if you're going into Papua New Guinea, you've got to take packs of pencils, pads, bags of sugar, flour, rice, soap. He said, and you take lots of them. He said, because, nobody wants money. He said, they just want to barter for what they haven't got. And that was so fortunate. He gave me that information. And we bartered all the way through. The funny thing was, in one particular place, that this lady came out and wanted to barter us, and she had tomatoes and she had potatoes and all manner of cucumbers and lettuces and all manner of stuff. And I'm of course big into curry, and I said to her, "Have you got any chilies?" So she said, "Oh yes, I'll bring you some chilies." So she came back and clearly ripped up a chili bush and gave me the whole bush with about 200 chilies on it, which I then dried and lasted us right the way through Papua. So we had some fantastic time. I would definitely go back there. Yeah. So we've also, Dick, haven't we? Morgan Grace, a regular contributor to Ocean Sailors, doing an article on fire extinguishers, the right type to use, fire extinguisher systems. That'll be really good, eh?
It will be very interesting. It's part of a follow-up of his safety at sea and how to repair a boat, etc. Yeah, it's very good. And incidentally, whilst I was talking to Morgan before he wrote it, he mentioned, of course, his experiences of brushes with pirates and the issue of weapons on board. And I asked him, would he carry a gun? And he said, only if I had a US Navy SEAL on board and I could guarantee that his gun was bigger than the ones we're likely to face. So in other words,
yeah, I think, when we distill all of this out, if you have been professionally trained to use arms, then maybe it's a consideration. But if not, you've got to leave it out, haven't you? Yeah. I think this discussion's definitely made my mind up. I must admit, I'd kind of played with the idea, but never been brave enough to have actually gone and bought a gun. No. Because anyway, then, as I said right at the start, you confront all of the issues of what you're actually going to do. Yeah. So I think, a lot of the security companies, where they're heading outside the region, the guns were bought in, I think they throw them in the sea anyway. Yeah. That's all very well. It's a bit of an expensive way of doing things.
Well, indeed. I mean, the respected cruiser forum, Noonsite, which everybody goes to, don't they, for information?
Yeah, it's a good site. That
it is a good site. They've got a sailor on there, Klaus Müller, a Swiss guy. He's a former soldier and he's also a sailor. And I've just made a note of his points. He says, first rule, never show a firearm unless you mean to kill. Number 2, are you trained to do this? Number 3, so your chances of killing your opponent are 0 if you're not. Number 4, add in crying kids, a sloping deck, it's pouring with rain. His conclusion is, in capped up, firearms on board is the wrong option. The only weapon I would want is Rene on board.
Yeah, well, Rene. We'll take a tape recording of Rene.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Scare everybody off.
Yeah, I like it, yeah.
And so we've also, Dick, haven't we got Delos?
Yes. That's Brady Troutman. That's the brother of the gentleman we spoke to in the initial podcast about, in the initial feature about Delos. That was Brian, his brother. This is his younger brother, Brady Troutman. And he went up, they all went up into the Arctic on a boat there, a beautiful classic Swan. And the strange thing is we've been talking about guns. And there, the authorities up in this island they went round, it's a Norwegian island, you have to have a gun. You're not allowed in if you don't. You have to hire a bolt-action rifle in order to defend yourself against hungry polar bears.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So
there you go. That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, yeah, lots to do and some great podcasts coming up. And Ocean Sailor, by the way, I just want to say is really, really racking up new subscribers, sort of 6, 8, 10 people a day. So finally, the word's getting out there. That's all good, eh?
That's great. Excellent.
Okay, well, that's about it for today, isn't it?
So it is. So the silver bullet of fate impacts on the full polyester jacket of personal buoyancy, and that's it.
Oh, God. Yeah, I'll just say good night then. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.